She laughed at him for being broke, but years later, she couldn't believe who he became. David was just a mechanic. He worked long hours, covered in grease, earning barely enough to survive. But his heart was full of dreams and full of love for Sarah, the girl he believed was a forever. Sarah, however, had different dreams. She wanted luxury, fancy restaurants, vacations abroad. And David, well, he could barely afford dinner. One evening, while they sat on a park bench, David looked into her eyes and said, "Give me time. I'll make something of myself. Just stand by me." But Sarah shook her head and whispered coldly, "Love doesn't pay the bills, David. You'll never be the man I need." And just like that, she left. Heartbroken, David didn't chase her. Instead, he buried himself in work. He learned, he studied, he saved every coin. Days turned into months, and months into years. David's life changed. He went from fixing broken cars to owning the dealership, from being mocked as a poor boy to becoming a respected businessman. One night, at a grand charity gala, the crowd whispered as a luxury car pulled up. Out stepped David, confident and successful, dressed in a tailored suit. Cameras flashed. Everyone wanted to meet him. And then across the room, a familiar face froze in shock. It was Sarah, the girl who once mocked his poverty, now standing in a faded dress, clutching an empty champagne glass, barely recognized by the same friends who once encouraged her to leave him. Their eyes locked. She gasped, "David, is that really you?" David smiled faintly, but instead of answering, he leaned closer and whispered something in her ear. Sarah's face went pale. Tears filled her eyes. She stumbled back, whispering, "No, it can't be true." But it was. She rejected him because he was broke. Years later, she couldn't believe who he became. Sarah rejected David because he was broke. Years later, she saw him again, transformed into a wealthy, successful man. But when he leaned closer and whispered something in her ear, her face turned pale. Sarah's heart raced. She stared at David, trembling, and whispered back, "What do you mean she's here?" David nodded toward the corner of the room. There, standing in a simple gown, was a young woman smiling warmly at David. Her hand rested gently on the shoulder of a little boy, a boy who looked strangely familiar. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The boy's eyes, his smile, they were unmistakable. They looked exactly like hers. Sarah stumbled backward. "David, that child, he can't be." David's smile faded. His voice was calm, but sharp. "You left me for money." "But Sarah, you never told me you were pregnant." The room fell silent. Sarah's hand shook. David turned to walk away, the child running toward him with open arms. And as Sarah cried out, the boy shouted, "Daddy!" Sarah collapsed into a chair, whispering, "No, this can't be happening." She rejected him because he was broke. Years later, she couldn't believe who he became. Sarah rejected David when he was broke. Years later, she saw him again, successful, wealthy, admired. But at the gala, David revealed the truth. Sarah had hidden his son from him, and when the boy called David Daddy, Sarah collapsed in shock. Sarah's hands trembled as she whispered, "David, please." "I can explain." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she confessed. "I didn't leave you because I stopped loving you. My family forced me to marry someone else. They said you would never give me the life I deserved. I didn't even know how to tell you about the baby." David's face hardened. "So instead, you let me believe you abandoned me for money? You let me live all these years without my son." The ballroom was silent. Guests pretended not to stare, but all eyes were on them. David pointed toward the woman beside the boy. "Do you see her, Sarah? That's Evelyn. She believed in me when no one else did. She helped me build everything I own today. And when I found out the truth about my son, she was the one who stood by me." Sarah's lips quivered. "So is she your wife?" David shook his head. "No, she's my business partner. Nothing more." "But Sarah," she raised him when you weren't there. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing, "David, please. I made mistakes. But there's something you don't know about your son." David froze. His heart pounded. What do you mean? Sarah looked up, eyes red, voice breaking. He's sick, David. And the doctors say he doesn't have much time without a surgery. The music swells. David's face went pale. He turned toward the boy, who was smiling innocently, unaware of the storm around him. And before David could speak, his phone rang. He answered, and a voice said urgently, "Mr. David, it's about your son. You need to come to the hospital. Now!" Sarah left David when he was broke. Years later, he became wealthy. At a gala, Sarah discovered David had found out about the son she hid from him. But then came the shocking truth. The boy was sick, and just as Sarah confessed, David received a phone call from the hospital. David rushed through the hospital doors, his heart pounding. Sarah followed, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Doctors surrounded them, speaking quickly. "Your son's condition has worsened. He needs surgery immediately, but it's risky." David gripped the doctor's arm. "Do whatever it takes. Save my boy." Sarah broke down, whispering, "This is my fault. If I had stayed, maybe he wouldn't have suffered like this." Hours felt like days as they waited outside the operating room. David paced, his fists clenched, memories flashing back. Sarah's rejection, the nights he worked hungry, the years of loneliness. Now, everything he had built meant nothing if he lost his son tonight. Sarah turned to him, her voice shaking. "David, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but if he survives, please let me try to make things right." David looked at her, his jaw tight. He didn't answer. Finally, the surgeon stepped out, pulling off his gloves. His expression was unreadable. Sarah clutched David's hand, whispering, "Please, God." The doctor took a deep breath. "Mr. David, we did everything we could." But suddenly, the monitor inside the operating room began to beep rapidly. Nurses rushed back in. The doctor spun around and shouted, "We're losing him." David and Sarah froze in horror. Sarah rejected David when he was broke. Years later, she saw him again, wealthy, powerful, and with a son she had hidden from him. But at the hospital, tragedy struck. The boy's life hung by a thread, and now David must decide between love, forgiveness, and revenge. Inside the operating room, chaos erupted. Nurses shouted. Machines beeped wildly. And then, silence. The surgeon emerged, pulling down his mask. "He's stable. We managed to save him, but the road ahead won't be easy. He'll need care, love, and both of you by his side." David collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down his face. Sarah sobbed, whispering prayers of gratitude. At last, David was allowed into the room. He held his son's tiny hand, whispering, "I'm here now, son. I won't let you go again." Sarah stood in the doorway, watching, broken, ashamed, desperate for forgiveness. Sarah knelt beside the bed, her voice shaking. "David, I made mistakes I can never undo. But please, let me stand by you now. Let me be a mother again." David stared at her, torn between anger and love. But when his son whispered weakly, "Mom, Dad, can we be a family again?" his heart broke. David closed his eyes, then nodded slowly. "For him, we'll try. But Sarah, this time, it has to be real." Sarah wept in relief, holding both their hands. And for the first time in years, they were a family again. Lesson: true love can survive betrayal when forgiveness is chosen for the sake of something greater.